It was raining, the night I realized I had finally run out of reasons to wait for him. Not a dramatic storm, just that steady, bone-deep kind of rain that turns the city into 1,000 soft mirrors. The kind that makes streetlights look like candles left too close to the edge of a table, melting and leaning, threatening to drip onto the floor. I sat at the tiny kitchen table with my palms wrapped around a mug of tea I'd already let go cold. The clock above the sink, the one that always ticked a little too loud when the apartment was quiet, had slipped past midnight. On nights like this, I used to leave the hallway light on for him. It felt like a lighthouse in the apartment's small ocean, a silent promise that someone was awake, watching the dark for him to come home. Not anymore. People talk about love like it's a grand event, a firework that cracks open the sky, but most love, the kind that sticks for a while, happens in small things. The second pair of chopsticks you keep in the drawer. The coffee mug he likes because it doesn't burn his fingers. The extra blanket folded at the end of the couch, even in summer, because he gets cold when he writes. That's how we began. Not with fireworks. With a blanket and a couch. I first saw him on a bleak afternoon. The sort where the sun tries but can't quite convince anyone it still exists. He was outside the cafe where I worked, sitting on the curb as if the city had shrugged and dropped him there, a black hoodie frayed at the cuffs, the hem kissed by old stains hung off him like a secret he hadn't decided whether to tell. He didn't look up when I passed. He only breathed, slow little ghosts of fog. I unlocked the cafe door, then hesitated, pressing my palm flat against the glass as if I could steady the day by holding it still. I told myself I was late. I told myself I didn't know him. I told myself a dozen tidy, reasonable things. "Hey," I said, anyway, pushing the door open again. "You okay?" He looked up like he was expecting to be scolded for taking up space. His eyes were red the way sleep deprivation paints them, and his mouth made the kind of smile that apologizes for existing. "Yeah," he said, "I'm fine." The way people say it when they've forgotten how to be anything else. That could have been the end. It wasn't. His name was Daniel. I learned this days later, after a paper cup of hot chocolate, after I said, "You can sit inside until your hands stop shaking if you want." After he started coming in when the sky turned, that particular gray that means rain isn't a threat. It's a certainty. Pieces of him arrived slowly. The story too. A girlfriend who'd grown tired of waiting for the promise of the future to turn into rent. A warehouse job that vanished in the kind of email that signs itself sincerely. Like that makes a difference. A family that believed love had terms and conditions, and he'd violated one too many. He told it slant. Like a song that only uses 3 chords but somehow still makes your chest ache. "What did you do before?" I asked one evening, when the cafe was empty and the neon open flickered like a tired eye. He blinked, as if no one had asked in a while. "Music," he said, "or I tried. I wrote. I used to think if I kept writing, eventually something would happen." "What happened?" I asked softly. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "Life," he said. "The night I offered him my couch had the kind of rain that finds every seam in your jacket and turns it into a river." He stood in the doorway, a silhouette threaded with water, and the words were out of my mouth before I decided if I meant them. "Just until you figure things out," I said. "I've got a couch, it sags, but it's warm." Temporary is a soft, dangerous word. It wears a friendly face and never arrives alone. It brings toothbrushes and second pairs of socks. It asks if you want anything from the store, and you say bread. And sometime after the second loaf you realize temporary has its own key. He wasn't easy to live with at first. He was quiet to the point of vanishing, an echo in a hallway that never resolves into a voice. He'd slip out for hours without a coat, come back smelling like old cigarettes and thin rain. He apologized for everything: the creak of the bathroom door, the clink of a spoon against a mug, the way his presence made the room different. "I can go," he said once, standing by the window as if the building were already letting him go. "Can stay," I said, and handed him a bowl of noodles, steaming in a way that seemed like the smallest possible miracle. "Eat, then sleep." He sat, he ate, He slept like someone whose body had been waiting for permission. The living room learned him. The couch shaped itself around his weight. The blanket I kept folded on the armrest learned his smell. The apartment made room, the way places do when people living in them decide to share their breath. One night I found him at the kitchen table, the cheap bulb above his head casting down a thin circle of light. He had a notebook open, the cover soft with years, and the pen moved with the stubborn, slow certainty of someone remembering a language they'd nearly forgotten. "You write late," I said. "The words come when the city shuts up a little," he said without looking up, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "When the noise gets tired and lets me speak." He let me hear a verse. He sang quietly, like he didn't trust himself not to break the song if he made it too loud. The chord was simple, the melody honest in a way most honesty isn't. It felt like something trying to knit itself back together. I bought a second-hand mic online that arrived in a box too big for its ambition. The cable was temperamental and the stand leaned, as if reconsidering its purpose. But when we taped a sock over the head as a pop filter, the apartment turned into a forgiving studio. We recorded between passing trains, between the neighbors' arguments, between the heater's rattling cough. I learned the anatomy of rejection emails. The polite ones signed best, and the lazy ones just thanks. I learned how to fold disappointments small enough to fit in the drawer beside the tea. I learned when to put my hand on his shoulder and when to leave the room so he could fall apart without an audience. But I also learned the way his face changed when a line landed right. When he looked up as if someone had opened a window in his chest, I learned he liked his tea too sweet and his noodles undercooked. I learned he hummed when he was scared, like he needed to prove to himself he still had a voice. We marked our tiny victories with food we couldn't afford and laughter. That sounded like relief. The first time a bar owner messaged back. The first time a stranger DM'd a line from a song and said, "This made me feel less alone." The first time he walked on stage and the microphone didn't squeal and his hands didn't shake. I sat on sticky floors under dim lights. I clapped until my palms throbbed. I stood at the back of rooms where dreams went to grow up or die and prayed his would choose the first. Asterisk, we had bad nights too. Nights where the bus home didn't come and we walked instead, counting quarters and pretending we liked the cold. Nights where he looked at me with that hollow, flight animal stare and said, "What if this is it? What if all I am is almost then? We'll be almost together," I said, trying to make a joke of it. "But I don't think that's what you are. What do you think I am?" "Someone who's going to have to practice being happy," I said, "because one day it won't be optional." He laughed soft, disbelieving, and pressed his forehead to mine in the thin corridor outside our door. "Stay," he murmured. A word I didn't know would one day mean please don't become a ghost. I stayed. The day the video went viral was ordinary until it decided not to be. It was a clip he'd posted weeks earlier, a song he wrote at the kitchen table about forgetting to forgive yourself. He had a pimple on his chin and the plant in the background was dying in an honest, cheerful way. A blog found it, then a bigger blog, then a person who used the word curating like a title. The notifications made his phone hum against the counter like a small, excited animal. "Breathe," I said, smiling so wide it hurt. "Just breathe." Showcases, meetings, nobodies we had heard of our whole lives suddenly learning to spell his name. I ironed shirts he didn't own a week before. I practiced nodding like I understood a contract sentence that had 17 commas. I said, "We'll have to think about that," in rooms where no one had ever asked what we thought. I used that word a lot then, in the beginning. I went everywhere he did. I was the person in the waiting room, the one who kept track of whose card did what, who gently took the third glass of champagne from his hand. I learned how to stand at the edge of circles so people would include me without remembering to ask who I was. But fame is a house that keeps adding rooms without warning. You turn to say something, and the person you love is 3 hallways away. He started saying my team and meaning people who had never seen him cry into a hoodie at 3 a.m. He started saying I when he meant we. And when I teased him about it, he kissed my forehead like he was forgiving a child. There were other changes too, little ones that pretend to be nothing. He stopped introducing me as his girlfriend. I became a friend, then someone who helped in the early days. He stopped coming home after shows, explaining that after-parties mattered, that networking was the job. His shirts smelled like clean money, like perfume with notes called names I didn't know how to pronounce. How late, I asked once, trying to be light about it, trying not to be the person who pulls the thread that unravels everything. Not late, he said, just necessary. You're tired. I'm alive, he said, and smiled. In a way that made me a little afraid for him. The interview hurt in a quieter way. I was washing a pot that didn't need to be as clean as I was making it, and the TV never meant to be on the channel that it was. A cheerful host. A couch he looked small on, even with the new muscles and the better hair. The question floated over the audience like a balloon. Who was there for you when you had nothing? He smiled in that new way. Glossy, practiced. Honestly, he said, I've always been a self-starter. I built myself up. I could feel the sound leave the room. I could feel the apartment listening with me. When he came home later, I had almost rehearsed a gentle version of what I wanted to know. It's TV. I would say they edit. Maybe you forgot. Maybe you were nervous. He kissed my cheek absently, already looking for a charger. You up? He asked, and it felt like a question to the air. I watched the interview. I said, yeah. His voice had no place in it for anything but yes. Crazy, right? We're doing late night next week. Can you believe it? Who was there when you had nothing? I asked, and hated how small I sounded. He frowned as if I'd asked him to do math after midnight. What? In the interview, they asked. I swallowed. You said, yourself. He blinked, then did that laugh that's really a dismissal dressed as charm. Babe, it's TV. You keep it simple. You make a clean story. People like clean stories. Is there a version that's clean and still has me in it? He stared at me like I'd asked a question the room wasn't built to hold, then kissed my forehead again. Don't be sensitive, he said. You know what I meant. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Maybe what he meant didn't matter as much as how it felt. I did not leave, not then. Love can be a faith that asks you to light yourself on fire for warmth and then tells you the cold is imagined. I was good at believing. I was excellent at patience. I made dinners that went cold. I had conversations with the closet door. We fought. Sometimes, of course, we did. He had a habit of turning a question about us into a speech about the industry. I had a habit of asking for the kind of gentleness he needed other people to see him giving, not me. We never slammed doors. We made our cruelty neat. His wedding was not a surprise. People like him marry quickly when the world says they can. As if vows can do the same work momentum does. I found out on my phone, like everyone else. The picture was a magazine photo pretending to be a memory. Her dress shimmered like it had practiced. His smile was the kind you can only wear for a few hours before it starts to crack at the edges. I wasn't invited. I told myself that was a mercy. Then I put on my coat anyway. The reception was held in a room so white it made everyone look a little unreal. I stood near the back and pretended to be looking for someone. I watched him laugh with men whose names were also brands and women whose wrists glimmered when they lifted their glasses. The band played a song he had written before any of them learned how to love him. He saw me. Our eyes didn't so much meet as trip over each other. I smiled because my face didn't know what else to do. He paused. It was a small pause, but there it was. Then he turned to the man beside him, someone with a jaw like a decision, and asked, "Do you know this person?" "This person." Then he shook his head. The smallest denial. The kind you could miss if you wanted to. A private erasure performed in public. I left before anyone had to watch me understand. On the walk home, the city was all wet edges and light bleeding into puddles. I kept thinking about towels, how, when they're new, they drink up everything. You ask them to, how over time they grow tired of absorbing and start letting the water run off. I was a towel that had learned to give back the rain. In the apartment, I took down the photo strip from the fridge. The one from the nightweed, stayed out until sunrise because we were too happy to go to bed. He was making the kind of face you make when you let yourself be dumb on purpose. I was looking at him instead of the camera. I found the guitar pick on the counter. The one with the little nick on the edge because he wouldn't stop worrying it with his thumb when he was scared. I folded the hoodie that had been temporary, and then became ours, and then became mine again. I put it all in a plain shoebox, like I was packing away a season. I didn't burn it. I'm not built for grand bonfires. I slid the box onto the back of the closet shelf and closed the door quietly, as if the objects were sleeping. People like to tell you the exact moment they stop loving someone. They put a pin in it. Here, this minute. For me, it wasn't a minute. It was a long evening of putting small things in a box and understanding that each one meant the story would not be told out loud by both of us. He had his version, I had mine. Only one of us would have the microphone the world wanted. A week later, he called. Not to apologize. Not to explain. To ask if I could let a courier in to pick up a jacket he'd left. Sure, I said, and listened to how calm I sounded. I'll leave it with the doorman. Thanks, he said, efficient kindness, business kindness. You good? I almost answered the way I always had, the way that made it easy for him to believe I would live where he left me. But the thing about loving someone through their darkest days is that you learn the shape of your own light by accident. Mine had been small and stubborn. It had learned to survive without his hands around it. I'm good, I said. And you? He paused as if surprised I'd asked. Busy, he said. The good kind. Congratulations, I said, and meant it in a way that drew no blood. Really? After the call, I made tea and drank it while it was still hot. I opened the window and let the city in. Somewhere, a siren negotiated with the night. Somewhere, someone in a neighboring building laughed in a way that made me want to bless them for still being capable of it. I began to write, not songs, I don't have that kind of courage, but sentences that made rooms inside me where I could breathe. Stories about almost and after and again. Stories where the person who stayed awake for the storm is allowed to sleep when it passes. I do not hate him. I think that would be easy, and easy is not how we learned each other. I do not forgive him, either, at least not in the tidy way forgiveness gets framed on greeting cards. I remember him. I remember all the versions. The boy on the curb. The man at the kitchen table humming his fear away. The stranger in a tuxedo who chose not to know me. Sometimes I imagine a future where he remembers. Memory is a graceless gift. It arrives without knocking and sits on the edge of the bed you made long after you've learned how to sleep in the center. Maybe one day, in a hotel room where the curtains don't close all the way, he'll think of the way the cheap mic leaned toward him like even it wanted him to sing. Maybe he'll think of my hand steadying the stand. Maybe he'll say my name out loud, just once, to see how it sounds in a room with no audience. But I don't need him to. That's the other thing I learned. There are people you take in when the night won't let them go. And there are people you let go when morning finally remembers them. You can be both kinds of person and still be whole. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in the spaces where I once lived, waiting by a window, measuring your worth in the number of times you are thanked or named or chosen, come. Sit by me for a minute, put your hands around this warm cup. Feel how it belongs to you even before you lift it. Feel how it asks for nothing but the small mercy of being held. You gave what you had in the dark. That is not an accident. That is not a waste. The world does not reward that kind of love on a stage because it has always been an offstage miracle. But the ones who were warmed by it, they go on. They build things. Sometimes they forget to turn around and wave. Sometimes they don't know how much of the heat was you. You know. That knowing is a kind of music you get to keep. It plays when the apartment is quiet, when the rain presses its ear to the window to listen back. It plays in your chest when you wake up and choose to boil water for yourself, not for anyone else. And the whistle of the kettle sounds like a small applause between rooms. He became famous. The world learned to spell his name and shout it. Good for him. He can have that noise. I am learning a different kind of volume. The sort that doesn't need a microphone. The kind that is loud only to me. My name fits in my mouth again. It tastes like something I cooked on purpose. It tastes like staying when the person who needed me was me. If you've ever loved someone through their darkest dark and watched them step into the light without turning back, you know this ache. You know this scar. And if you're here with me here, where stories are told softly enough to hear your own breath, you also know this. The light you lent was not lost. It just went where it was sent. It's okay if the person who took it forgot to say your name. You still know it. Say it now, if you want. No one will interrupt you. I won't. The rain won't. The clock above the sink can tick as loudly as it needs to. Say your name until you can hear it over the memory of his dot. Then drink your tea while it's hot. Then sleep when morning comes. You won't have to leave the hallway light on for anyone else. You'll open the door and step through it yourself. And I'll be here when the night gets loud again to remind you gently, like laying a blanket across your shoulders, that being forgotten by someone famous is not the same as being nobody. You are the story that carried someone. You are the hands that kept a person from falling through the winter of themselves. You are the room that turned into a home just long enough for a life to begin again. And now that you remember your own name, you get to live in the center of the bed you made. This is Whispered Scars. We don't erase. We remember.